An honor to be here again. I see some new faces today, so welcome. Thank you so much for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Talita, and I am a teacher here at Alumni. And this talk today is part of the series that we're calling Books in the Wind, in which we discuss very important literary works of the American literature. So today, let me share my screen so you guys can see it. Can you all see my screen? Yes? Great. Thank you. So, as you can see, today's book is Beloved by the American author Toni Morrison. And this is also one of my favorite books. I feel like I'm super biased because all of my talks are about my favorite books. But yes, it has had a very important impact on me. So I really hope you like it. It's going to be a challenge not to cry until the end of this talk because I feel I feel very emotional with this book, but everything's gonna be all right. And I've used a few illustrations for this talk, and all of them belong to this lady here, Eloise Dorson Ratched. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but yeah, just to give her credit. Yeah, if you feel like sharing something, you can write something on the chat, or you can even go ahead and open up your mic. If you have any comments or questions, you're welcome to participate. All right. So here we go, guys. In today's talk, I want to tell you about Toni Morrison, the author. Then I'm going to talk about the book, so about the plot of the book, but more important than that, I want to talk about the types of innovation and the impact that Beloved has had in the world in general. A few disclaimers. So I will be giving out spoilers. So spoiler alert, if you feel like you want to read this novel and you don't want to know what happens, then I'm so sorry, but I'll be talking about the plot. But I don't think that matters like at all, because reading Toni Morrison is much more than just this encounter with the plot. It's an experience. So even knowing the plot, I would highly recommend you guys read this book. Then we have some trigger warnings. I don't know if you've ever heard of trigger warnings, but this is very common, especially for movies and TV shows, I guess. So people need to know if they're about to watch a movie or about to watch a TV show, if there's something in it that is going to trigger some type of trauma or discomfort. So I think it has become more frequent with books as well. Before people read a book, they need to know if there's something that's not going to be unsettling to them. So the trigger warnings for this book, oh my God, there are many. I'm going to list it to you. So it talks about ableism, there's animal abuse, but it's off page, it's only implied. Assault, bestiality, childbirth, child death, referenced and haunting, slavery as a backstory, also death, paranormal creatures, physical abuse, pregnancy, racism, including slurs, and sexual assault off page. So a lot of the things we see are actually implied, but there's nothing like too graphic. As you can see, this is not for the faint of heart. This is a heavy book. So yeah, just so you know, we are going to be talking about very unsettling things here today. So before we get started, I would like to know from you guys, has anyone here ever read Toni Morrison? Doesn't need to be Beloved. Any other book by Toni Morrison? Okay, I see people just shaking their heads. Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. So that's probably the first encounter you're having with Toni Morrison. That's too much responsibility. I hope I can live up to the expectation. But yeah, here we go. Let's try to understand why Toni Morrison has become this such an important name, right? And if you think about the landscape of what was going on in the 80s and the 90s, I think looking at the Nobel Prize literature winners is a good way for us to understand the type of author that got praised and sold many books. So up until the mid 80s, all of the winners were men, mostly white men. Then at the end of the 80s, we start having some people of men of color, and then in early 90s, we start having women. But in 1993, we have Ms. Toni Morrison as the Nobel Prize winner, the Prize for Literature winner. And she is the first Black woman to ever win this prize. So, yeah, I want us to learn more about Morrison and understand why she got so popular and she won so many awards, especially because of Beloved. So a little bit about her background. So she was born in 1931 and she died in 2019, so only 5 years ago. She is originally Chloe Anthony Wofford, so that's where Toni comes from, right? This Anthony. And she was born in Lorain, Ohio. She went to Howard University, where she got her bachelor's degree in English, and then to Cornell University, where she got her master's in American literature. Then she won a Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1987 and the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1993. She published 11 novels, 7 children's books, 2 short fictions, 3 plays, and 11 nonfiction works, among essays, articles, prefaces for books, etc. So she wrote a lot. And most of her work is about it's like an examination of the Black experience, particularly Black female experience within the Black community. So this is going to be this is where she's coming from. That's what she wants to talk about. I want to go through her most famous novels so you'll have like an overview of her work. All of the covers, the book covers that I've added to those slides, they are from a collection from Random House Editions. So they're all like this, a solid color, like a plain color, and then the title of the book in this cursive handwriting. So you'll see if you start looking for Toni Morrison books, you'll see this is a very popular edition. So the first one to be published was The Bluest Eye. It came out in 1970 when Toni Morrison was already 39 years old. So she published her first novel at 39, which I think is very inspiring because I myself am 38. So I'm thinking, okay, if Toni Morrison published her first novel when she was 39, I still have 1 year to do something great. I know it's kind of silly, but she really inspires me. And the Bluest Eye is about a little girl. She's a young Black girl, and she has an extremely difficult childhood. And she thought her life would be better if only she had blue eyes, like the white people she sees around her, who have such an easy lives which are a lot easier than the one that she has. Then the next book she published was Sula in 1973, which is about friendship between 2 Black women and how we can sometimes be blind to the love that we already possess. So love is not just about romantic love. In 1977, she published Song of Solomon, and it's about this young Black man searching for his identity and trying to escape an oppressive society. And I feel like the more she published, as she was like releasing those books, she was getting more and more recognition and respect until we get to 1987, when she publishes Beloved, and this is considered her magnum opus. This is considered her masterpiece. So I just wanted to show you here this first one. This first cover is from this collection that I told you, Random House. But the second one is also very common. This one is a Penguin edition of the novel Beloved that has the little house on the cover. And this is the one that we have at Alumni. So if you are an alumni student and you want to go to the library to borrow this book, this is the one that you're going to find. And I also wanted to show you the Brazilian version that we have. This is the one I have also in Portuguese. So I basically read the one that I borrowed in English from Alumni, and also I bought the translation by José Rubens Siqueira, and I thought it was a very good translation. So I really want to like incentivize you guys to read the novel in English, but in case it's not possible because it is challenging, well, go ahead and buy the book in Portuguese because the translation is pretty good. So yeah. Okay. So there are many things that Toni Morrison is able to achieve in Beloved, and it's interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk to you about Jazz, which was published in 1992. And this one here is actually set in New York City in the 1920s. So if you were here for my latest, the last talk that I gave about the Harlem Renaissance, you will be able to understand the context of this, where this book is set. And of course, Toni Morrison is writing here in the 90s, so it's a lot later than when the Harlem Renaissance happened. But of course, she got pretty much inspired and influenced by everything that happened in the Harlem Renaissance. And she said it like explicitly that Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin, all of those authors, and even jazz, like music, inspired her greatly. So going back to Beloved, what I wanted to show you is that after she published Beloved, she talked a lot. She gave lots of interviews about writing about the Black experience and wanting to explain how she did it because she wanted to be extremely respectful and accurate. So how could she rely on the accounts that we have about Black history if most of what we have was actually written by white people? So she says, I'm going to read it to you. First was my effort to substitute and rely on memory rather than history, because I knew I should not trust recorded history to give me the insight into the cultural specificity I wanted. Second, I determined to diminish, exclude, even freeze any overt debt to Western literary history. Neither effort has been entirely successful, nor should I be congratulated if it had been. Yet it seemed to me extremely important to try. You will understand how reckless it would have been for me to rely on Joseph Conrad or Mark Twain or Herman Melville or Harriet Beecher Stowe or Walt Whitman or Ernest Hemingway for insights into my own culture. It would have been equally dim-witted as well as devastating for me to rely on Kenneth Stamp or Ralph Waldo Emerson or Thomas Jefferson or any of those sages in the history of the United States for research that would enlighten me on these matters. There was and is another source that I have at my disposal, however, my own literary heritage of slave narratives. And if you guys have been frequenting Henrique Carretero's talks about American history, you know that some of the slaves that were brought to America to work, they were actually able to learn how to read and write in English, and some of them left registers of their experience being taken from Africa and made to work in America in brutal, like horrible conditions. So we have people, for example, such as Ulauda Equiano, Phyllis Wheatley, Frederick Douglass. They actually had journals where they registered those stories. And also, Toni Morrison wanted to hear stories from the Black community that were passed on orally from generation to generation. So she would rather rely on that than trust the accounts of all those white people talking about Black people. And she's going to coin a term that she'll call rememory. And this is going to be a technique that she's going to use in Beloved. This is the definition. Rememory, recollecting and remembering as in reassembling the members of the body, the family, the population of the past. And it was the struggle, the pitched battle between remembering and forgetting that became the device of the narrative. So you're going to see that the characters are going to struggle with remembering horrible things that happened in their past and trying to forget a few things. And the whole narrative is kind of fragmented for that reason. Okay, another quote that I thought was very interesting. Nobody in the book can bear too long to dwell on the past. Nobody can avoid it. There is no reliable literary or journalistic or scholarly history available to them to help them because they are living in a society and a system in which the conquerors write the narrative of their lives. Yeah, so how can we take back this protagonism? Yeah. And the last quote, in the final pages of Beloved, memory is insistent, yet becomes the mutation of fact into fiction, then folklore, and then into nothing. So what does she mean? What is this process, right? Transforming fact into fiction, then into folklore, and then into nothing? Where does that go? What happens to memory? It gets dissolved. So let's see what she's gonna do, guys. Before we take a look at the book, I just wanted to give you a definition of the title, right? Beloved is an adjective that means loved very much. But you'll see that in the book, we have two very important characters called Beloved. So it's the name of two women that appear in the novel. This is the first page. So as soon as you open the book, remember, if you were here for the Moby Dick talk, there was a page, the dedication page. Herman Melville dedicated Moby Dick to Nathaniel Hawthorne, right? And here, Toni Morrison is dedicating 60 million and more. Oh, you guys have the English versions. Now I can see the chat. I'm so sorry. I was so like, so Vanessa, she has bought some, but hasn't had the time to read. I totally get you. Yes, my to be read pile is just, adding up. Valkyria says, I have already 2 books in Portuguese. That's great. I have Sula Beloved and The Bluest Eye. I'll read them when I finish my translating studies. Much work to do. Yes. The English versions. Oh, Valkyria has read Beloved. Oh, that's so cool. I hope you can help me and make some comments here, Valkyria. I think that would be really, really interesting if you can contribute with your thoughts. So yeah, so Toni Morrison is dedicating Beloved to 60 million and more. And she gave an interview to Newsweek in 1987 in which she explained that the figure of 60 million is the best educated guess at the number of Black Africans who never even made into slavery. those who died as captives in Africa or on slave ships. They didn't even make it to America. So 60 million and more Black people who will never know the story of or the names of. After the dedication, we have the epigraph, and it is an extract from the Bible. I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. This is from Romans 9:25. Toni Morrison was a Catholic, and there are some biblical allusions here in the book. And according to what I've heard, because I'm not an expert by any means, it seems that is when Paul says that even Gentiles or non-Jews will be loved by God. That's what it says. And then before the novel itself, we have a foreword or this preface that Toni Morrison wanted to write to explain that she had this inspiration to write Beloved when she lost her job. So what was she going to do with this newfound freedom? And she wanted to talk about this, what it means to be a free person and what it is, what it would be like to be a slave seeking for freedom. That would be the central theme of what she wanted to do. And she explains that Beloved is actually based on a true story. And it's based on the life of a woman called Margaret Garner. She was an enslaved woman who had a child, and she managed to escape. But then, when found, she murdered her own child because she knew that she would rather kill her child than see him become a slave, and she would rather go to prison for the murder than getting back to slavery. This is a very striking story, and Toni Morrison wanted to write about that. So what happens, right? It's trauma on top of trauma. What do you do with that? Yes, so you'll see that this is very heavy, but freedom and slavery are going to be the underlying themes of Morrison's journey with Setha. Setha is the main or the central character of Beloved, who is inspired in Margaret Garner, and what is going to happen to them throughout the story. So just a quote from the foreword that I thought was interesting. She says that the order and quietude of everyday life would be violently disrupted by the chaos of the needy dead, that the Herculean effort to forget would be threatened by memory desperate to stay alive. To render enslavement as a personal experience, language must first get out of the way. And I thought, like, when I was reading it, I was like, how is she going to do that? How is language going to get out of the way when you're telling a story? We need language in order to tell a story. All right, we'll see. So the structure of the book is something like this. The book is divided into 3 parts and into 22 chapters. The chapters don't really have a name, so what this edition of the book did was to give us the first few words of each chapter. So you'll see that part 1 is the biggest one, then we have part 2 and 3, but the first section of each chapter, of each part, starts kind of the same way. So part 1 starts with 1 to 4 was spiteful. Part 2, 1 to 4 was loud. And part 3, 1 to 4 was quiet. 1 to 4 is the number of the house, is the address of the house where Setha lives. So I'm going to tell you a little about the beginning of the book. This is the very beginning. I would like to read it to you and then talk about the plot itself. Okay, here it goes. 1 to 4 was spiteful. I'm sorry, let me get this out of the way. Okay. 1 to 4 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. For years, each put up with the spite in his own way. But by 1873, Setha and her daughter Denver were its only victims. The grandmother, baby Suggs, was dead, and the sons, Howard and Bugler, had run away by the time they were 13 years old, as soon as merely looking in a mirror shattered it. That was the signal for Bugler. As soon as two tiny handprints appeared in the cake, that was it for Howard. Neither boy waited to see more. Another kettleful of chickpeas smoking in a heap on the floor, soda crackers crumbled and strewn in a line next to the door sill. Nor did they wait for one of the relief periods, the weeks, months even, when nothing was disturbed. No, each one fled at once, the moment the house committed what was for him the one insult not to be borne or witnessed a second time. Within 2 months, in the dead of winter, leaving their grandmother, baby Suggs, Setha, their mother, and their little sister, Denver, all by themselves in the gray and white house on Bluestone Road. It didn't have a number then, because Cincinnati didn't stretch that far. In fact, Ohio had been calling itself a state only 70 years, when first one brother and then the next stuffed quilt packing into his hat, snatched up his shoes, and crept away from the lively spite the house felt for them. So first thing we notice here, I guess, is that we know where the story's set. It's Ohio. And if you have been participating in Henrique Carretero's talks, you probably know that in the 19th century, we have this division of the country. Let me get a pointer here to show you. So Ohio is here, over here, so it's the free part, free state. But the story we'll see that does not start here, because in the past, Setha used to work as a slave in Kentucky, on a farm in Kentucky. So she had to escape along the Ohio River in order to get to the north safely. And another thing that's interesting is that Toni Morrison was born in Ohio. So she probably knew exactly what it was like to live in this so-called free state, but she probably had her own share of experiences with racism to know that, is it really free, right? Okay, another thing we notice is that we already have the introduction of many characters. So I took the liberty to call 1 to 4 a character because so much happens in the house that I think the house is a character. So 1 to 4 is a character. And Setha is our central character. So I guess most of the book is told from her perspective. And Setha has a daughter, Denver, who lives with her. Baby Suggs was her mother-in-law who died years before. And we have this ghost, so this baby Venom, and we know that the house is haunted. Everybody knows that the house is haunted. And we know that Setha is a free woman now, but she had to escape slavery. Setha believes that the ghost that is haunting the house is actually the ghost of the spirit of her oldest daughter, who was called Beloved. We also know that there were two boys, Bugler and Howard, but they fled, they ran away, because Bugler saw the mirror shattering out of the blue, and Howard was looking at the cake on top of the table, and he saw tiny little baby fingerprints appear out of nowhere. So he also got scared and ran away. So Setha and Denver, because they live in this haunted house and weird things happen, they were shunned by the community. So they only have each other's companies and the ghost's company. Well, after a while, Paul D arrives. And Paul D is a visitor that Setha knows from the plantation where they used to work together in Kentucky. This plantation, this farm, was ironically called Sweet Home, and they were both able to escape, but they hadn't seen each other ever since, right? They were together on the farm. So he arrives and they start to have a relationship. And Paul D is able to threaten the ghost away. However, what comes in the ghost's place may be even harder to bear. So 18 years after beloved, the daughter, the baby, died, beloved, the woman appears, and she's a very mysterious woman. And we learn little by little the whole story. You know that it's based on the life of Margaret Garner, so you know she killed her own child in an attempt to escape slavery. And what Setha did when she was able to escape the farm, she was still pregnant with Denver. She had her oldest daughter, Beloved, and the two boys. So she was running away with the three kids. She was able to get all her children across the Ohio River to freedom. But when once she arrived in Ohio, 28 days later, her white master found her and she came to claim them. They were all his property. And Setha takes all of her kids back to the woodshed and she wants to kill all her kids because that would be something she would prefer than giving all her kids to the master. And she only manages to kill her daughter, Beloved. And then we learn that she had to saw through her neck. That's how she killed her. And she says in the book, if I hadn't killed her, she would have died. And then 18 years later, this mysterious lady called Beloved appears right after Paul D is able to threaten the ghost away. So we spend the length of the book wondering, is this a reincarnation of the baby? She may or may not be, but more than that, they're both symbols. So what are they representing in the story? And then other things happen, and I won't tell you what happens next because I've given out too many spoilers already, so you can read the book if you want to know what happens next. But Beloved basically examines the dehumanizing effects of slavery and how trauma affects people differently. To Setha, she is totally mired in the past. She cannot get away. She's too traumatized. And to Paul D, he dissociates completely. He wants to shut down and forget things and not feel things. And one of the things that they are going to argue about is that Setha feels too much and Paul D does not want to feel anything. So each character has been irreparably scarred. Okay. So, guys, when I tell you like the premise of the story, what happens in the plot, it seems to make perfect sense. Okay, we know what's happening. This is the exposition and the rising action of the story that's going to lead up to the climax, but it's not like that. Beloved is written in a different way, and we are thrown into the narrative, and things do not happen chronologically and do not follow a sequence of events that is logical. And it makes me very curious because if only I could talk to Toni Morrison and ask her, how did you write this book? I keep thinking, did she write it like chronologically and then cut it all out and then reassemble the pieces? Or did she have a technique to be able to write this in such a like fragmented and disconnected way? But somehow that's kind of like our thought process. That's how our mind works. And that's how memory works. It's not something linear and, crystal clear as the plot of a movie. So we as we are learning more about the characters and their characters' past, we understand their relationships and their trauma and what happened to them. And we put the pieces together and we start to understand what and when things happened. So I don't know, it's really hard to explain, guys. You have to read the novel so you really like grasp what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's a difficult way of reading at first, and then things start to make sense, and you're like, ah, so that's what happened. And, things start to make sense. So I want to tell you about innovation because this is very innovative. The first thing I want to talk about is this non-linear narrative. So this is a series of fragmented and interconnected flashbacks, memories, different points of view. And of course, this stems from a tradition of stream of consciousness. If you guys know a little about modernism and what writers were doing in early 20th century, for example, Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, they were experimenting with this stream of consciousness and trying to convey how the human mind works, how we think, rather than being following a very strict set of rules or on how people should be communicating that would make sense. So it's kind of like we are thrown into the mind of the character and we are thinking the way the character thinks. This is a chapter told from the perspective of Setha in first person. And just to give you an example of one of the strategies that Toni Morrison uses, I'm going to read it to you. She's mine, beloved, she's mine. Leaves, she puts them in a round basket. The leaves are not for her. She fills the basket. She opens the grass. I would help her, but the clouds are in the way. How can I say things that are pictures? I'm not separate from her. There is no place where I stop. Her face is my own, and I want to be there in the place where her face is, and to be looking at it too, a hot thing. All of it is now, it is always now. There will never be a time when I am not crouching and watching others who are crouching too. I am always crouching. The man on my face is dead. His face is not mine. His mouth smells sweet, but his eyes are locked. Some who eat nasty themselves. I do not eat. The men without skin bring us their morning water to drink. We have none at night. I cannot see the dead man. On my face daylight comes through the cracks, and I can see his locked eyes. I am not big. Small rats do not weigh for. And it goes on. So we have no punctuation. We have very little capitalization. We don't know where one idea starts and ends or when another begins. And it seems to be like a few ideas of what the character is remembering, like a few scenes, but at the same time, what the character is thinking about her own self. So it's really hard to understand. But at the same time, if we know that Toni Morrison is trying to give us an insight um, on what Setha is thinking and how much she's suffering with all her trauma, then we try to, it makes more sense. Yeah. The second thing that was very innovative was the use of multiple perspectives. So there are many chapters told in third person from Setha, Baby Suggs, Denver, Paul D's point of views, but also in first person from various perspectives, different characters. There's change of verb tense. So it starts using the simple past tense, but then a few chapters are going to be using the present. So again, a strategy for us to understand how memory is fragmented here, right? And how the past and our own history affects what we are and what we do in present. Okay, here are just a few examples of the multiple perspectives. The first part is from Setha's perspective. So But you know all that because you're smart, like everybody said, because when I got here, you was crawling already, trying to get up the stairs. Baby Suggs had them painted white so you could see your way to the top in the dark where lamplight didn't reach. Lord, you loved the stair steps. I got close to being a Saturday girl. I had already worked a stonemason's shop. A step to the slaughterhouse would have been a short one. When I put the headstone up, I wanted to lay in there with you. And it continues, it goes on. So you see that one of the things that we can notice is that she's not really following the rules of grammar. the Of course, this is Setha thinking, this is Setha speaking, and she uses a dialect, right? She uses Black English as a dialect, so that's how she expresses. And another thing that is precious is the use of collars, because she is explaining that baby Suggs, her mother-in-law, painted the steps of the stairs white because it was too dark in the house in 1 to 4. And when Denver started crawling, she couldn't see the top of the staircase. So the grandmother painted it white. And you'll see many references to color in the house. So there's like a patchwork quilt that has patches in different colors because they didn't have access to a lot of different fabrics, but it somehow made it pretty. And the furniture was mismatched, so they had different colors as well. And of course, the color of the skin is also going to be a symbol. Yes. And this second extract here is told from the perspective of a character that's called Stampede. And it goes like this. 1 to 4 was loud. Stampede could hear it even from the road. He walked toward the house holding his head as high as possible so nobody looking could call him a sneak, although his worried mind made him feel like one. Ever since he showed that newspaper clipping to Paul D. and learned that he'd moved out of 1 to 4 that very day, Stamp felt uneasy. So this is when he explains that he found out via the newspapers that Setha had murdered her own daughter. And Paul D was already having a relationship with Setha, so he just cut out that part of the newspaper to show Paul D what atrocity Setha had committed. And Paul D leaves the house that day. Okay, use of magical realism. And you're going to tell me, oh, Talita, come on. We are from Latin America. We're so used to magical realism, right? We have this tradition here. But Toni Morrison's going to use it a little differently. And of course, we're going to have references from African culture. So this idea of a haunted house, a ghost inhabiting the same house as the family, has a lot to do with the Yoruba mythology. Also, there's an idea called Dead Erin from the Gula people, which is also a tribe from Africa, that says that you might have some spirits returning from the dead in pieces. So that would make sense as a reference as well. And baby Suggs, she kind of becomes like a priestess because she gives those sermons, she organizes those rituals with singing and chanting, which is going to be very common in African American tradition of religion, right? This mix. So this is an extract from the book that talks about the fact that baby Suggs was organizing those ceremonies. Let's read it. When warm weather came, baby Suggs, holy, followed by every black man, woman, and child who could make it through, took her great heart to the clearing, a wide, open place cut deep in the woods. Nobody knew for what at the end of the nobody knew for what at the end of the path, known only to deer and whoever cleared the land in the first place. In the heat of every Saturday afternoon, she sat in the clearing while the people waited among the trees. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down. Then she shouted, "Let the children come!" And they ran from the trees toward her. "Let your mothers hear you laugh," she told them, and the woods rang. The adults looked on and could not help smiling. Then, "Let the grown men come," she shouted. They stepped out one by one from among the ringing trees. "Let your wives and let your children see you dance," she told them, and ground life shuddered under their feet. Finally, she called the women to her. "Cry," she told them, "for the living and the dead. Just cry." And without covering their eyes, the women let loose. So Baby Suggs was this yeah, this figure, this authority, right? This religious authority for the Black community um, for a while, right? Then, of course, she dies, but this is those moments are so beautiful and so touching to read. Another thing Toni Morrison is going to use is oral storytelling. So African American tradition of storytelling, as I told you, not only written, the written accounts that we have, but the traditions that the family passed on from generation to generation. And here's an extract. "That much she knew. The overseer at Whitlow's place brought her the news, more from a wish to have his way with her than from the kindness of his heart. The captain waited 3 weeks in port to get a full cargo before setting off. Of the slaves in the hold who didn't make it, he said, 2 were Whitlow pickaninnies, but she knew their names. She knew, and covered her ears with her fists to keep from hearing them come from his mouth." So how they communicated, and they knew each other's stories, and they knew each other's names. Yes. Again, the idea of the 60 million that never got here. And the beautiful use of symbolism and metaphor. So beloved is a symbol for the 60 million and more lost in slavery, whose stories we will never know. And we'll see a lot of references in the book, a lot of times when slaves are compared to animals, to hogs, to cattle, to horses. So again, this dehumanizing way in which they're treated. And another theme that's very present is mother love and the mother-children relationships. She says, "Unless carefree, mother love is a killer." It's very complex, guys, because Setha was raised motherless. We learn in the book that because in the system of slavery, they intentionally disrupted this mother-child relationship. Baby Setha, when she was young, is fed by another woman. She doesn't really know her mother. And later in the novel, we will find out that one of the most traumatic events to her was when she was still breastfeeding one of her babies, and the white masters stole her milk. So they're taking everything. And when you are a slave and you have kids, your kids are also property, and they are going to become slaves as well. So we have this big question. If your children do not belong to you, what does it mean to be a mom? Can you be a mom at all? So this is like this unflinching exploration of trauma, delves really deep into the psychological and the emotional scars. And as I told you, Setha and Paul D deal very differently with their pasts and their memories. And Setha is going to become so obsessed with this traumatic event, which was killing her own child, that she's going to get lost in it. And Paul D wants to shut everything out and not feel anything. So he says to Setha, your love is too thick, he said, thinking. That bitch is looking at me. Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys. For some reason, I'm gonna have to stop sharing because can't see it anymore. Yes, now I can. I'm sorry. Your love is too thick, he said, thinking. That bitch is looking at me. She's right over my head, looking down through the floor at me. Too thick, she said, thinking of the clearing where baby Suggs commands not the pods of horse chestnuts. Love is or it ain't. Thin love ain't love at all. Yeah, it didn't work, did it? Did it work? He asked. It worked, she said. How? Your boy's gone, you don't know where. One girl dead. The other won't leave the yard. How did it work? They ain't at Sweet Home. School teacher ain't got them. Maybe there's worse. It ain't my job to know what's worse. It's my job to know what is and to keep them away from what I know is terrible. I did that. What you did was wrong, Setha. I should have gone on back there, taken my babies back there. There could have been a way, some other way. What way? You got 2 feet, Setha, not 4, he said, and right then a forest sprang up between them, trackless and quiet. Wow, her writing is like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. My goodness, I want to read this book again. So this thing that Paul D says at the end, you got 2 feet, Setha, not 4. Again, referencing to what the masters used to do, compare them to animals. So when you commit such an atrocity, where is your humanity in that? Yes. And and I love Setha's response when he accuses her love to be too thick. Love is or it ain't. Thin love ain't love at all. So how are you gonna love just a little? Yes. How are you gonna feel? How can you how are you gonna control how much you feel something? So yeah, guys, you have to read this book. It's just amazing. And then as I was like reading and preparing this talk, I came across this article, this paper which I thought was very interesting. It was published in 2006 by this guy, this researcher called Lars Eckstein. And the name of the article is A Love Supreme, Jazz-Thetic Strategies in Toni Morrison's Beloved. So look at that. She has a book called Jazz, but the guy decided to look for a jazz-thetic or an aesthetic of jazz in Beloved and not in Jazz. And he's going to compare the novel to an album by jazz musician John Coltrane. And I thought it was extremely interesting because she is, of course, Toni Morrison is absolutely inspired by jazz and influenced by jazz, but he's going to use the structure of the music in comparison to the structure of the book. So something a little bit bigger than just like the rhythm or of jazz or the tradition of music. Oh, you love a love supreme, Vanessa. Yeah, and this article is available online. If you cannot find it, send me an email. I'm going to put my email on the chat. So if you guys want to read it, send me an email and I can send this to you. But basically, he's going to explore this. Oh, I'm not going to play the album. We're not going to have time, but you guys go ahead and listen to it. It's on Spotify and YouTube. But look at what he does. He first like describes what he's considering this jazz aesthetic, and then he draws those parallels. So A Love Supreme, parts 3 and 4, because it has many parts, the album, and Beloved, so pages 200 to 217. And he is going to compare how the themes, the music theme and the literary theme develop a similar way. I thought it was unbelievable. So very interesting article. And yeah, I think nothing is like uncalled for. I'm pretty sure everything Toni Morrison did was laden with intention, artistic intention. So yeah, I think there's something there that we should explore. And if that doesn't make you fall in love with arts, I don't know what will, because I see those things and I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. We should be studying arts all day long, every day. So yeah. And I want to tell you a little about the impact that the novel has had. Of course, the most blatant is the amount of awards that the woman received and might still receive. So the Nobel and the Pulitzer were the most, I guess, important, right? But she also received a lot of others, not only for Beloved, but also, as you can see, for A Song of Solomon or her whole literary work. Then in 1998, we have an adaptation for the cinema, which is a movie with Danny Glover as Paul D and Oprah Winfrey, talk show hostess Oprah Winfrey as Setha. And this is actually very interesting because apparently when Oprah was like, on top of everything and everybody was talking about Oprah Winfrey, she had a book club. So she suggested, I guess, monthly titles that everybody should read with her. And she really loves Toni Morrison. So they read Beloved and other books. And she was so passionate about Beloved that she convinced Toni Morrison that they should have this book adapted and she should be the central character. So she went on to play Setha. And this is Beyonce's tour, Homecoming. I couldn't find the part that she actually cites Toni Morrison because I think for copyright reasons, but it's apparently available on Netflix. On YouTube, I could only find the trailer, and the trailer, there's I guess, a quotation by Maya Angelou, which is another unbelievable author. But at some point, when she was touring with this Homecoming tour, she quotes Toni Morrison's, this is from Song of Solomon, "If you surrender to the air, you can ride it." So another thing, yeah, well, it's available on Netflix, so if you guys can watch it. Another reference I could find was Black Thought from the band The Roots in his address at Portland State's Martin Luther King Day. He recites Toni Morrison. Let me see if I can share the video because I couldn't embed the tweet, but I guess I can do it here. Just a sec. I guess it's gonna work. Can you see it? Can you see the tweet? All right.
To be literate, in spite of the fact that the New York Times is written and always has been written on a 6th grade level. And that the ego of black people is a thread of jelly in need of constant cement. More important, accurate scholarship and free, dedicated artists would reveal a singularly important thing. That racism was and is not only a public mark of ignorance, it was and is a monumental fraud.
You can watch the whole thing if you want. So he is reciting Toni Morrison here. Another thing I could find is this jazz musician, Akua Naru. I didn't know her, but then she wrote the song inspired by Toni Morrison. Let's listen to a part of it.
Toni Morrison, yes. girl in mind. The fifth woman inside, banging some on the mamas on 45s. Four score for the bluest side. Kept that yearning low tide until for cola bore that burden of mine. Most vulnerable kind, black girl lost and confined.
Isn't it beautiful that we have like John Coltrane inspiring Toni Morrison, and then Toni Morrison inspiring Aquanaru, and so on and so forth, and it's never ending. That's the beauty of it. So yeah, listen to her when you have the chance. And yeah, these were a few examples I could think of, but I'm pretty sure there's so much out there that wouldn't be possible if it hadn't been for Toni Morrison. And that's why I wanted to talk about Beloved today. So I wanted to hear from you guys. I think especially Valkyria, who is probably the only one here who has read the book. If you have any comments or things you would like to share.
And, well, I... o que eu fiz aqui? Hello, good night, good evening. And so I read this book, I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but I don't remember very well the history, but I think that is very difficult to understand it, to writing, the structure of write is difficult because it's not in linear. It is present and the past, and I think it's very difficult the writing, but I think it's very hard, the history, very the settle history, the slavery history. It's I didn't know the kind of this history, and I think it's sad, the hard, it's and it's interesting also. And after your explanation, I think I needed to read again this book, because I think I forgot some details, something. I think I need to read again this book. But as this structure, writing structure is difficult, I don't know if I am going to read in English or Portuguese. I don't know, because it's very difficult. I think this structure is like another American writing. I don't remember that. It's very famous. That he wrote. Oh my God! It's very difficult also to his writing. It's I'm going to remember this one. He's very famous, and I think it's 20 in the beginning of the century. No. This.
Oh, Leticia's asking if it's James Joyce.
No.
No?
It's American. No, it's American writing. It's very difficult. It's like that. It's past and present. It's not a linear structure. Som e a Fúria.
Oh, let's see the name in English.
Yes, Som e Fúria. Who is the writing?
The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. Oh, it's
William
Faulkner.
Faulkner
Yeah.
is very difficult also.
Yeah.
It's like the William Faulkner. Yes.
Okay.
Well, I started to read Som e a Fúria. In Portuguese, I stopped this book. Very, very difficult to read.
Mhm.
Som e a Fúria. It's very difficult. But I know that there are another books of William Faulkner, very, very famous, but I think I know that I'm going to read it also. I think Toni Morrison writes like him.
Oh, we have a suggestion here on the chat, Valkyria. Valkyria,
Blue
try
Eyes,
reading The Bluest
Blue
Eye by
Eyes, yes,
Morrison. It's
okay,
beautiful
okay,
and easier to read in English. I highly
okay,
recommend
thank you,
it. Yeah, so
thank
maybe
you,
that's the way to go. But yeah, I agree with you. Thank you so much for your contribution, Valkyria. I agree with you.
thank
It's
you,
difficult. And it's like
yes,
when I started reading the book, I was very confused because not only is it like, as you said, non-linear and fragmented, and at the
yes,
same time, it's a horror story because it's a
yes,
house that's haunted by a ghost. So you're
yes,
like, what is going on here?
yes, yes,
But then as you move on and you start to understand things and things start falling into place, I think it's so beautifully done. The way she builds everything, the plot and the characters, and when we have the shift of perspective, there's one particular chapter that's written from the perspective of the white master that is revolting and disgusting, and you kind of feel it under your skin what Setha feels. So the
yes,
way Toni Morrison accomplishes that, I think is
yes,
so brilliant.
yes, very, very interesting, yes.
Mhm.
I'm going to read it again.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, you
thank you.
should do it. Yeah, I think I'm going to read
Yes,
it again as well because it's one
yes,
of those
yes.
books that have so
Okay,
many layers, right? It's like an
yes.
onion, layers and layers. I feel like every time you read it, it's something different. Oh, I think we have a question. Estella, do you want to open
Okay.
up your mic? Go ahead, Stella. Can't hear you. Do you want to send me on the chat? No? What is going on? I know that you're not on mute, but I can't hear you. Yeah, so try sending me on the chat your question. Everything is broken, Stella. Oh my goodness. I'd like to suggest the Audible audiobook of The Bluest Eye. Oh, very interesting. Guys, do you know this platform Stella is suggesting called Audible? It's a platform for audiobooks. And I feel this is a wonderful alternative for people who don't really have the time to read. Because you can be like driving your car or going to work by subway and you're listening to the book. And Stella says it's narrated by the one and only Toni Morrison, so you can actually listen to her voice. Wow, thank you so much for the suggestion. I have never listened to them, so I would like to. So yes, guys, Audible is an interesting platform. I know that there's one with books in Portuguese called Esquilo, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't know if they have Toni Morrison's work there. Leandro has sent us the link to the platform in case you guys are interested. I think you have to pay a fee, something like Spotify or something. but a great way to read books if you don't really have the time or if you just enjoy listening. What else, guys? Any more comments, questions, suggestions? I'm loving the suggestions, guys. Nothing else you would like to share? Okay, all right. Thank you so much for your participation, guys. It's always good to hear from you because I feel like I'm just talking here nonstop for 1 hour. So it's great to have your input as well. And next talk, Books in the Wind talk, is going to be on the 28th of September. We are going to talk about poetry, Emily Dickinson. Oh, Vanessa, you are amazing. Come on. And this is going to be a lot lighter. I know that today has been heavy, not an easy subject, but I promise next time around it's going to be poetry. I want to talk about beautiful things and not so much about suffering. So I hope I can count on your presence at the end of the month. Thank you so much for coming. It's always a pleasure.
Um,
Thank you, Maria Amélia. I appreciate it. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.